All right, guys, welcome back to the Discovery Eden podcast. My name is Brandon,
I'm Jonathan.
and we're continuing our series, Fire and Water, with spiritual warfare and all that. But we're on a time crunch today, a little bit of a time crunch, so we're gonna get right into it, and then we'll go move on ahead. Wow, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is awesome. Anyway, we need prayer, so I'm gonna get that, and we'll go into it. All right, dear God, I just thank you that we are able to even do something like this and that you, Lord, are a part of it. Because without you, I feel like this wouldn't go well. We're just two guys who work at pizza places who, well, we like rambling and don't really know what we're talking about half the time, I feel like. But God, you know how to make sense of kind of our ramblings. Um, and I pray that whatever it is that is from you, from our conversation, that you would lift it up and that you would cause it to linger and stay within the minds of people listening. And if it's not from you, that you would just let it fall to the ground and be forgotten. I pray that you, above all, God, are lifted high. Uh, and I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right. Get into the bumper, and again, we'll get right into it. Yeah, well, yeah, never mind. Anyway, welcome back. And kind of going off of what we talked about last week,
Mhm.
I did mention a couple Bible verses, and I mentioned in passing Ephesians 6, um, which is the spiritual armor of God.
Yeah.
And I held off on it because I already knew what we were talking about this week, which was this exact thing. So we're gonna actually just start in Scripture right at Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 20. So I'll read it first, and then we can kind of
Discuss it.
discuss it. So finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me, that whenever I speak, words may be given to me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should. And this, of course, is from Paul,
Mhm.
who is imprisoned at this point in time. For those who want context, this is one of Paul's letters to the church at Ephesus, the Ephesians.
Mhm.
There we go. So that is the passage
Yeah.
on the armor of God.
So even beyond just the armor of God, because I'm assuming you were reading from the NIV, right?
Yes, that was the NIV.
So I have the ESV pulled up, and it's phrased a little differently. Same idea. But the verse that stands out to me more than anything is right at the beginning. And in the ESV, it's, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness." To me, that is just like something about that verse has always struck me. Specifically in the ESV, the way it's phrased, there's just a power to it. I don't know why. It just
Well,
it tickles my brain.
and I'm and I'm glad that you brought up a different translation, because
Mhm.
this is what's so impactful about kind of reading these different translations and kind of talking about them in different ways, is you gain little bits of insight into
Mhm.
different aspects of them.
Yeah.
So obviously, if they're different translations, they translate a little bit differently.
Yeah.
There's certain things that things translate better than others.
Mhm.
So in some circumstances, like they translate word for word,
Mhm.
or you get phrase by phrase, idea by idea,
Yeah.
different things like that. Um, but just like in the Hebrew, there's multiple meanings
Mhm.
to words.
Right.
Like one word can have multiple different meanings. It's multi-layered. It's not a simple one-to-one comparison. So that's where the translation becomes a little bit more complex.
Yeah, absolutely. But it just as we talk about spiritual warfare, that is the verse that my mind jumps to when we talk about spiritual warfare. Again, specifically in the English Standard Version translation, like it.
The extra spiritual version.
Yes, the extra spiritual version.
ESV.
But I think it's really just the phrasing of how it's laid out in that verse. But that is where my mind jumps when I hear spiritual warfare. Just it's not about against the flesh and blood, but it's against this present darkness. You know, the
Well,
authorities
and I guess kind of going alongside that notion. Okay, so there is a lot like Rome. Let's just think of the Roman Empire, kind of known for conquest,
yeah, just a little,
just a smidge.
just a tad.
So conquest, war, all that kind of stuff. People at the time would have been very much, they would have been used to it.
Mm-hmm.
They would have seen it. They would have seen the consequences of it. And yet Paul, in his letter, denotes a similarity yet a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of hearkening to, hey, you see this culture that's happening all around you? Yeah, it's that, but in a whole nother plane of existence.
Yeah.
But yet also intertwined within our own
right
physical reality. Which kind of, again, harkens back to the spiritual realm, physical realm.
Kind of what we talked about last week. The onion of our world.
Yeah. So kind of going along to that.
Mm-hmm.
So spiritual armor. I guess simple question. Yeah, it's not so simple. Why do we need spiritual armor? Why is it something that we need to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was you last week who mentioned you view spiritual warfare like a battlefield. And I think that's just as you would put on armor on an actual battlefield, something to protect you. You need something to protect you on the spiritual battlefield too. And yeah, that's how I would simply put it. In layman's terms, you need something to protect you from. If you're going out to war, you're not going to go out there in your undies. Your undies alone.
I mean, maybe you could.
I'm not saying you could. I'm not saying you can't. But is it wise? Not necessarily.
Yeah, and I think kind of why I kind of have this battlefield mentality is because of this very passage in what Paul is kind of getting at and talking about.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
all these things, because when you think of like a Roman centurion or basically any Roman soldier, you have their whole get up. Like you think gladiator, different things like that.
Yeah,
obviously it's not quite the same, but like they have this get up. They have things, but often what you think of when you think of that, you think of it in terms of power. but more offensive power, not defensive power.
Sure.
And I think what Paul is trying to get at, and maybe, again, this is just me kind of talking about the passage and how I see it. So I guess it's according to me, not necessarily one way or another. But how I've always seen it is, like, especially when you get to like the sword of truth, you don't use that sword for offense.
Yeah, I was actually gonna mention that it's even the way it's phrased almost is in a more defensive, protective light rather than in, hey, you're gonna use it to take down your enemies.
And this is something that I kind of find it troubles me a little bit, because you see a lot of debates and other people, like,
Sure.
even for like debating the faith and different things like that. And I'm like, there's value to it,
Sure.
but at the same time, I feel like that's using it in a way that's more combative rather than defensive.
Sure.
Now, obviously, in arguments, you can be defensive, but then there's not really much of an argument.
Yeah.
It's just protecting your point. But I think, like, in this terms of like the battlefield that Paul's kind of talking about, if anybody have seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge,
Haven't seen it. I know what it is though.
So, for those who don't know, Hacksaw Ridge follows an individual who, well, doesn't want to take life on the battlefield, more pacifistic, and is a medic.
Yeah,
he's a medic, and he goes out and he tries to save whoever, be that enemy or friend. And to me, like, on the spiritual warfare battlefield that we find ourselves on, we're equipped in medic attire.
Ooh, interesting.
So, what is the sword of truth? Obviously, in Paul's analysis or whatever, as he speaks about it, he's doing it in reference to a Roman soldier on the battlefield. So it would have been things that they would recognize.
Right.
So you think about that in a medic. Now, medics, even on the battlefield, have, weaponry. They have to defend themselves.
Sure.
From getting attacked.
Yeah.
But what is their sole purpose?
To heal.
To heal. To protect. To save. Now, obviously it's not a one-for-one comparison.
Sure.
We're the medics, but we're there to guide the wounded, not necessarily save them in the same way. Obviously, in our point of view, like, God does the saving, but we're guides that allow God to do the saving. So we can be vessels that embody that. So even if we, quote unquote, do the healing, it's only God doing the healing through us and us not taking the credit.
Right.
So when I think of a battlefield, that's what I think of.
I think that's a good way of looking at it.
At least in what Paul writes here. So let's go to quite a heavy question, potentially, and seeing where this conversation goes. So I know this can get into some of the root things, and maybe we go into original sin, maybe we don't. But why is there spiritual conflict?
He said it was going to be a big question.
It is a big question.
Yeah.
It's a seemingly simple response, but at the same time has nuances of difficulty.
Well, you mentioned original sin. I
I
almost feel like we should just start there.
I maybe gave you a nugget.
Yeah, I almost feel like that's the most appropriate answer. Obviously, it goes deeper than that, but I almost feel like that's where the conversation needs to start.
And in all fairness, this is a conversation that could last several episodes. We're only going to merely scratch the surface. I'm just going to put that disclaimer out there right now. 'Cause this is a can of worms, and I realize I opened it.
Bum, bum, bum.
So, original sin. What is original sin, Jonathan?
It is
Sin. Done. No,
yeah, well,
period. No, kidding.
the way I understand it is the first sin that was committed in the Garden of Eden, by Adam and Eve. That's how I always understood it. In the most basic sense.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, that would be the first initial time where it's like, yeah, it's when, they disobeyed God's commandment, like they being Adam and Eve, when they partook of the fruit
Of the tree.
Yeah. And in some respect, that's original sin.
Now, are you going to dive into like the rebellion of Lucifer? I have a feeling that's where he's going, and he mentioned a can of worms. I could be wrong though, but I could. I see the fire in his eyes.
So when you go back to the serpent, asking his sly little questions of, did God really say that? He's inciting little seeds of doubt. Now, what caused that doubt to start? Was it because the serpent, or so everybody thinks of as Satan or Lucifer, different things like that, sinned before that to cause this falling out? And in doing so, basically engaged Adam and Eve in also joining in and contributing to sin for basically God's creation, which was blameless at that point, to turn against. It's really it's in the weeds, and I don't necessarily have an answer, but I don't know. It's something to stew over.
Yeah.
But there's always been this seemingly animosity between the evil one, Satan, versus God.
Yeah.
And basically Satan wanted to be God, to be that usurper, to kind of take over, except for the fact that he still has to ask permission to do things, but that's besides the point. It's still wanting to take control, and to be something that you're not. It's kind of like the trope that you see in some movies, like it's the created taking on the creator.
Very anime-esque.
Yeah, very anime-esque. You see this in different times, like even in Xenoblade, for example.
Which we did talk about, by the way, if you're interested.
But it kind of goes toward a conversation that's a lot deeper. And the way that Xenoblade handled it, like with the voice lines and everything like that, I'm like, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
For like some of what the world will take out of it.
Sure.
Basically, anarchy and all that kind of stuff, which is, I think there should be like an order to things, because, well, we were made in an order.
Yeah.
So why try to disturb that which was already made and already claimed good? And then obviously you have original sin and all that, the separation between us and God. And then there's just been kind of this, battle going on ever since. Now, I'm really curious to see, like, obviously we have this spiritual warfare example in Paul's letter here. I would be really curious to see what that quote-unquote spiritual battle would have been
Mm-hmm.
when Jesus was on the cross. Which that's a whole picture and image
Mm-hmm.
that we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know what that looked like. Yeah. Anyway, I don't really know where I'm going with this. I'm just kind of rambling. So let's actually continue on my okay. So like the enemy's purpose, seek, destroy, take down, separate,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, which is an antithesis to who God is.
Right.
So Jesus is there to bring life, healing, restoration, everything like that. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that either. All right, I just put things down on my phone. I'm like, yeah, that seems good. We can talk about that. And I'm like, cool. I had no time to really prepare as much, so
So that'll be a 3-second bullet point.
all right. So this one I actually came up with questions. So
Okay, 5-second bullet point. Got it.
okay.
I'm messing
All
with
right,
you.
all right.
He's gonna ask a question that I don't know the answer to, and then I'm gonna feel stupid.
Well, they're thinking questions, you know.
Whatever you want to call them.
So in Paul's letter, he comes out with different, particles of armor or clothing. I was gonna say particles of clothing, but it's armor and yeah, whatever.
Tomato. I knew what you meant.
Parts of armor. And I'm gonna kind of go down the list and kind of, bring up some questions that may pop. Well, that I thought of. So
Get that
I-
perspective.
oh yeah, for reference.
Exactly. I'm gonna go off the NIV though this time, so that
Okay.
we're going off the same one.
So I combined a couple of them sometimes. So we have the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are belts and breastplates used for? And what is their purpose?
Well, the breastplate is obviously to protect your chest.
Protect your heart.
Yeah. Kind of the vital organs.
Yeah.
Right. A belt,
Well, you don't want to get caught with your pants down.
that would be not ideal on the battlefield. And so
I'm not ready. Wait, hold on. Time out.
they gave me the loose pair. I'm a 34 waist, not a 36. All right. Did you have a question with those?
Yeah, I said, what are they used for and what's their purpose?
Oh, I did. I already answered. Look at
Okay.
me go.
Oh, awesome. So, in what ways does the way that Paul, talks about them, so the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of readiness, or whatever,
Belt of truth.
is it belt of truth?
I think that's what she said.
Yeah, belt of truth. Yep. Ignore me. I'm trying to I was looking at the next one, the readiness, and I'm like, that's okay. Whatever. Reading's hard. So when you think of truth and righteousness,
Yeah.
do you think of those as core to your faith? Like in terms of spiritual warfare and how do you
Sure.
combat the enemy?
I would say so. I mean, if you're looking at it in the sense of the actual articles of armor that he's using, a belt of truth, it sounds silly, but you don't want to be caught in a,
Caught with your pants down.
caught with your pants down, caught in a lie, caught in, deception or whatever, or being deceived on the receiving end of it. And then as a breastplate of righteousness, you need to protect your heart from that which is evil.
Yeah.
So yes, I would say
And you guard yourself with righteousness.
exactly
You don't
with that which is good.
Yeah. You surround yourself with that which is
Mhm.
good, as opposed to that which is not.
So I would say yes in regards to spiritual warfare. To answer your question, by using the articles of clothing to answer your question.
So, when we think of ourselves on a spiritual battlefield, we're in enemy territory. We don't necessarily have the home field advantage. So, there's a lot of, darkness in this present world, to go with the ESV version. There's a lot of that surrounding us, and it can be easy to have that seep into or corrode the armor that we're wearing. Yet, you gotta hold fast. You gotta have that belt of truth on to know what is right, to know what's good, to keep yourself protected. Because otherwise, your lower half's looking pretty vulnerable. Or, if you don't have that chest plate on, your vitals are susceptible to being corrupted.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the shoes. So, the shoes of readiness from the gospel of peace. What good are footwear on the battlefield? And why does it matter?
Well, I would imagine a battlefield is more rugged terrain, right? You don't want your poor little feet
that's a
being
sword
sore.
there.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I mean, if you're traveling over rugged terrain and you're on a battlefield, there is some sort of hurry, some sort of rush. And it's a lot harder to run when you're barefoot. And so when they say shoes of readiness, that's kind of where my mind goes, is be ready to cross, the rugged terrain. Not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense, whatever that may be. So that's kind of where my mind goes, at least in regards to that.
And even when we think about that in terms of like spiritual warfare, obviously in this life we have hills and valleys. You hear that a lot in different.
Very churchy.
Very churchy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of highs that we can go through. So, times where life's pretty good. And then there's some lows that can be quite low, where things seem to be crumbling around us, without fail. Things keep happening that we don't expect. We keep getting bad news, different things like that. And this is where those shoes of readiness come into play with the gospel of peace. How do you find peace in the situations that you find yourself in the locations that you find yourself in? How do you find peace in the valley? How do you find peace on the mountaintops? Because sometimes it can go to our head when we're on those highs or on the mountaintops. We're like, wow, I'm doing so great. But on the inverse, flip side of that, when you're in the valleys, you're like, wow, I am not great. And there's nothing, I can seemingly not get out of this rut that I'm in. And even going back to the shoes of readiness, on the battlefield itself, how often do you think soldiers have to go about face and turn the other way abruptly because of enemy attack?
Probably a lot.
So you have to be ready to go in a direction that you don't know. You don't know if it's the correct way to go, but you have that blind faith. Well, it's not necessarily blind, but it's blind faith to kind of go with who's commanding you and the direction they tell you to go.
And I think that leads into the shield of faith. If I would be so inclined.
What do you mean? So shield of faith. So what's a shield used for?
Again, it goes back to that protection thing. But it's interesting because the breastplate we also talked about as protection of the vitals. The shield is something more that's held outward. Almost as though it's your first line of defense, right? I don't know.
Well, there's going to be attacks from all angles. You're not necessarily going to get attacked from, in front. In the passage, they refer to the flaming arrows of the evil one. So the arrows to protect above.
Mhm.
But also, when I think of a shield, I don't necessarily think it's defense for us,
But for others,
but for others
Mm.
that don't have a, you know,
sure.
that breastplate, that don't have, that helmet that we'll get
Sure.
to later. Again, we're medics on the battlefield, in my opinion. We're there to do the defending. We're not attacking. This is a defensive posture. It's shielding,
Mhm.
protecting. We take the hits almost because we have the armor to prevent against them. For unlike those who don't. So, why is a shield necessary in this sense?
It goes back to what you just said. We're called to be disciple makers, to be protectors. We are the medics on the battlefield. It's our, I would say it's our job to protect those, to shepherd those, to guide those, to be willing to put out our shield.
Yeah. And like you think of this in like hero movies, Hero Maker, different things like that. Like I know we talked about the hero narrative at some point in the podcast. Don't remember exactly when, but it was
Probably the
probably
first series.
probably the first series. But when you watch a movie, for example, in like a battlefield, different things, what's your term of a hero? Well, it takes on two forms. One that does all the attacking and is like seemingly indestructible, overpowered, different things like that. Or you have the person that's willing to self sacrifice in order to save another.
Mhm.
And this is where this countercultural stuff comes in. For like, how do you make your faith countercultural? Is it to, like, is it your role to go on the offense? To take down the enemy in Jesus' name? Or is it to shield those who may not have protection? And doing so in a way that doesn't benefit your own self promotion, but instead does it in a self sacrificial way to save another. Which one seems more Christ like in that?
I would argue it's the latter, right?
Yeah. That would be my argument, at least. And this is, again, why I think, the battlefield role is more defensive rather than offensive. Because, again, it ties into much of the same things that Jesus himself taught and lived out. So let's move on to the last little bits of stuff. So we have the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. What's the helmet and the sword used for? And then I also ask, is the sword more defensive or offensive in nature?
Well, we talked about the sword earlier, briefly. And in the context of the whole passage and how everything is described defensively as described as armor, I would say it's used more in a defensive way. Almost as like a... My mind kind of goes to like the Legend of Zelda, when he's got the beam of light. It's almost like not a, again, that's more offensive, but kind of it's a shining light, like a guiding light almost. That's where my mind goes with the sword, at least. The helmet, again, it's more protective, but this is the one where I would say I'm a little more helmet, salvation, something.
And
Yeah.
this is where the conversations can start to come up. What is helmet like? A helmet on the battlefield, well,
It's used to protect your
it,
head.
it protects your head, but then you have the shield, which protects you against the flaming arrows. So what is the helmet for?
Protect your mind.
I think that's part of it too. So guard your mind.
Mhm.
But when you think of it in terms of salvation,
Yeah, and that's where I'm struggling a little bit.
so, and maybe this is me spitballing at this point. So, again, take it with a grain of salt. On the battlefield, how do you identify who is an ally versus an enemy?
I don't think you're spitballing. I think you actually just explained it in a really easy to understand way. Usually the helmets are differentiated between one army versus the other. So if it's the helmet of salvation, it's easy to identify who.
Because when I think of, again, going back into this example, it's the helmet of salvation. But in terms of this is more of what it appears on the outside versus what's happening on the inside. This is for the people who are those wounded soldiers. And what do they look for? Well, if you look at, again, you have, like, when you think of like a Roman soldier, they have like the poofy, like the Martian, Marvin Martian headdress, different
There's
thing.
definitely a name for it. I don't know what it is.
The
floof.
It's a floof. It's very recognizable.
Yeah.
Um,
You see it, you know what it is.
But like that's what comes in terms of me, like, or you look at it in terms of who a commander is versus a foot soldier, different things like that. Obviously, nowadays the helmets all kind of look the same, but again, you kind of turn back the clock a bit, and then look there. What do, like, if you were to look out for a certain characteristic that's different from somebody, what do you look towards?
Yeah.
And, well, if they're on the ground needing help, what are they going to do? They're going to look up. And one of the first things they'll see, because if you're on a battlefield, you're going to see people with swords. You're going to see people with all these other things. But what sets yourself apart from what's an enemy, what's an ally, is that helmet.
Sure.
And how like, of your future, I guess. Like, I know what salvation looks like for me, and other people can hopefully see that as it's represented in the way that you act, whether that be the righteousness, whether that be the peace that you have amidst traversing the battlefield. And wants other people to want to go to that person with that helmet of salvation on. Like, what does that look like? Please save me. Like, it's a cry for help for other people who may be down on their luck or different things like that. And it's a symbol regardless if you're ally or enemy. Like, that's my take on it. Because I've always been kind of confused of, why is it helmet of salvation when you think of things in terms of battle?
Yeah, that's what I was that's why I said I kind of lost on this one.
Obviously. Talked a little bit about the sword. Again, I'd argue more defensive rather than offensive. It's a sword of the spirit. So what does the spirit do in spiritual warfare?
I would argue. I feel like I've said that a lot. I would argue. So to avoid being redundant, I would say the spirit guides, right? And guides through truth and goodness. And again, I think that's why he describes it as the sword of, but also as the word of God. So if we believe that the Bible is led by the Spirit,
And take this into consideration for the sword.
Yes, sir.
So, something that is kind of true of like a lot of different cultures, commanders will often have a sword. Now, what that sword is used for is not necessarily combat, it's for orders. Charge, hold back, like the way that
Almost like a baton.
yeah, again, it's kind of going to that guide aspect. And one of the ways that the spirit is often referred to is the guide that guides your thoughts, your actions, everything like that. Almost the sixth sense. It's attuning to that. And the sword being the word of God, the Bible. I don't want to say the Bible is a guidebook, but it shows you how to live your life in the way that God has shown of himself. So there's obviously good things that are in there to live by. Obviously, you have proverbs, different things like that. Like there's just good words to live by in some aspects. But in other ways, it shows different ways of living counterculturally that signify who you are in comparison. Again, kind of going with the helmet again. What sets you apart? These are things that set you apart. Your helmet and the sword. Because everybody can have a shield of faith. It's
Sure.
just what placement do you place that faith is determined. Everybody can have a belt of truth. You might just think you're true or different things like that. Righteousness, you might think you're right. But when everything boils down, what are the things that set you apart specifically as a Christian is your helmet of salvation and the sword of truth. That's what signifies who you are. I did want to go into a further example of how the sword is defensive.
Okay.
I know we actually talked about this actually when I was writing this, oddly enough, at church in Nehemiah 4. So when they're trying to rebuild, basically rebuild the temple in Israel. And Nehemiah was basically given permission, like from Babylonian exile, whatever, was able to get permission to go rebuild the temple. And the people in the area, they're like, "Oh no, they're coming back. We must stop them." And they're all in a tizzy trying to prevent them. So what Nehemiah and everybody did is they would hold a hammer in one hand, sword in the other. They're working on the wall, but keeping the sword to defend against the enemy. They're not going out and attacking the enemy. They're going in. They're placing it as a defense. I will fight if need be, but the main goal is to keep working on this wall and building up the temple.
And I think you see that. I know you mentioned debates earlier. And I think there are definitely those who go out there looking for a quote unquote fight. In the sense that let me prove that I'm right, you're wrong, yada yada yada. But I would argue that we are under an obligation to stand by what is true, and it goes back to what you just said. Not necessarily looking for the fight,
But you can stand
someone-
your ground.
exactly.
You can stand your ground if confronted.
Yes, and that's what I was getting at.
You're not looking for a fight,
No.
but you can defend. Again, a defensive posture rather than an offensive. And I think so often in culture, we think to offense, 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 offense. Especially like in a battlefield example. Well, what wins a battle? Well, often you think of, well, you just beat the other side better than you get beaten. Well, and that's true in some respect. But the battlefield's a multi-layered thing. It's an onion. There's ebbs and flows to it. There's strategy. There's different things that happen. There's those you're trying to protect. There's ideals that you're trying to protect. Different things like that. Like when you think of sieges, what are sieges for? Well, it's to prevent the other people from getting resources. So there's multi layers to the battlefield. And even more so in the sense that you have a physical versus spiritual battle going on. And it doesn't help that we often don't even see the spiritual side of things because we can't physically see the spiritual side of things. Now, some may have been granted the vision to see some of these things, but I'll be honest, I don't often see it that much myself, if at all. So it's almost a battle that we're fighting that we don't realize we're in. And that's kind of what spiritual warfare is, because I think for a majority of people, they don't realize they're under attack by spiritual warfare, and they blame other things that could otherwise be from spiritual warfare, and they just don't realize it.
Sure.
And maybe that's a super faithful approach to some of the things that go on and happen in our world. Like, for example, cancer that affects a loved one unexpectedly. God, why would you let that happen? Different things. Well, what if God isn't letting? Like, what if, that it's just something that happens? And God might be using it to help you grow. Even if what it seems like is really detrimental and tears down. And this is where it gets complicated. This is where it's like, God, why would you let this happen to somebody? And we don't realize it might be to allow us to grow. Because in order for us to grow, there has to be growing pains. Why is that? Because growth requires change. We can't change if everything goes the way we expect it to. Like what would real like if nothing changed, how would you grow? Often when I've been at my highest point spiritually is usually when I'm at my lowest physically. When everything seems to be crashing around me. Why is that? Well, first off, I started looking in the direction of God. Because so often, and I know this in my own life personally, that was not my first initial turn to. I didn't initially turn to God. And all I did was bottle up everything and cause things to ultimately get worse. But when I kind of gave it over to God, I offered him the burdens that I had. It relieved the pressure that was building inside. It's like, and you hear this sometimes. It's like a weight lifted off your shoulders. It's the yoke that we carry can sometimes be too much for us to bear, and we choose to keep holding on to it because that's all we know. What God does is gives us the avenue to transform, to change. We wouldn't know what taking off the yoke would do for us because we're so accustomed to having it. Kind of has that approach to it. Anyways, any other thoughts on the spiritual armor?
No, I feel like we covered most of it.
And obviously this could be a whole series in and of itself, I think. And we just kind of zoomed past it. But anyway, hopefully that was insightful for you and helped you. And we'll figure out what we're talking about next week. But
We'll get there when we get there.
I think that'll be it for this episode. So thank you again for watching. Again, if you have any other things that you would love for us to talk about, comment down below. We'll read them and we'll talk about them. And then, without further ado, catch you guys on the flip side.
Toodles.